This is Booked on Rock. I'm Eric Senich. Our guest, Barry Delve, author of Electric Light Orchestra, Every Album, Every Song. The ELO story is one of continued success for over 50 years. From inauspicious beginnings in 1971, where live audiences barely reached double figures, ELO would become one of the most popular bands in the world by the end of the decade, thanks largely to the songwriting and production talents of Jeff Lynne. There were hits like Evil Woman, Mr. Blue Sky, and Don't Bring Me Down, multi-platinum albums like Out of the Blue and Discovery, and of course their spectacular stage shows. Although ELO finally called it a day in 1986, they re-emerged in 2014 as Jeff Lynne's ELO, playing a triumphant comeback concert at London's Hyde Park. Since then, they haven't looked back, releasing further albums to critical and public acclaim, culminating in ELO's biggest ever live show at Wembley Stadium and 2019's chart-topping album, From Out of Nowhere. As well as examining all of ELO's recorded catalog, Barry Delve has spoken to many people who've been involved with the band over the decades, uncovering along the way previously unseen photographs and new information about the group and their recordings, making this one of the most comprehensive guides to ELO ever published. Barry Delve is an author and artist. He is acknowledged as the foremost ELO expert in the Chilterns, if not the whole of South Buckinghamshire. To hear a playlist of ELO, including the songs discussed in this episode, head over to the show notes page. Barry, thanks so much for being on the podcast. Really looking forward to talking some ELO with you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. And thanks for giving me the chance to talk about it, Eric. I was saying to you, it's a new thing for me. It's the first book I've ever written, and it's really nice to talk about it.
Well, that's great. I'm glad that this is your first appearance. This book just came out January 28th, I believe, right?
That's right. In the US, Jan 28th, and it came out in December in the UK.
Before we actually get into the band's discography, let's get into the early beginnings here. When and how does Electric Light Orchestra come to be? Now, at the time, they were just called Electric Light Orchestra. I think it was a little while before they shortened it to ELO.
You're right. The band's name was shortened to ELO, and kind of officially around when Time came out in 1981. Electric Light Orchestra, or ELO, was really the brainchild of a guy called Roy Wood. He was in a band called The Move, who were really big in the UK from about 1966 onwards. Just about all their singles went top 10, or their first few anyway. And their first hit in 1966 was called Night of Fear. And that actually used Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture as part of the riff of the song. So Roy Wood was kind of really into classical music, and he was really interested in how he could integrate that into a modern rock band to make it part of a working band. So they were recording their fourth single, Fire Brigade, in 1967. And that's when it really occurred to him that wouldn't it be great if I could have an electric light orchestra, a rock band that incorporated strings as part of its touring lineup and could produce stuff on stage that we just couldn't normally do with a traditional 4 or 5 piece band. So that's where the seeds of ELO were planted. Roy Wood had the idea in about 1967. He spoke about it with other members of The Move. ELO's drummer, Bev Bevan, was in The Move as well, and Bev joined Roy to join ELO. He kind of spoke about it, and he would talk about it around the clubs, and he was friends with Jeff Lynne, who we'll hear a lot about later on. Jeff Lynne was in his own group, and they were pretty local to each other in Birmingham, in England. Jeff had his own band called the Idle Race, and Jeff and Roy would hang out together, and often Roy would talk about this idea of a band, Electric Light Orchestra, which would have this string section in it.
The history, when people think about this band, they think Jeff Lynne, but really this was, as you wrote, a realization of a 4-year dream by Roy Wood.
Yeah, absolutely. It was Roy's idea. I mean, Roy was a really creative guy, always looking for something different to do. And I think maybe he's not as well known because he kind of was always looking for the next thing. You know, he didn't stay with ELO for that long, but it was his idea. And there were some lineup changes in The Move. Jeff Lynne was asked twice to join The Move. And on the second time of asking, in early 1970, he said, yeah, I'll join The Move, but only if we can make ELO a reality. I don't want to be a second fiddle to you in The Move. Let's try and take this ELO concept forward. And that's why Jeff joined The Move.
That's interesting, too, because the plan was to run both ELO and the Move in parallel. The reason was financial, correct?
Yeah, so, I mean, the Move had contract to record, but at the background was always this ELO idea.
And that idea becomes reality. And the first ELO song recorded was 10538 Overture. This is from their debut album, the self-titled album, released in December 1971 in the UK, March of 72 in the US, where it was given the title No Answer. The lineup is Roy Wood, credited with vocals, cello, oboe, guitars, clarinet, among other instruments. Jeff Lynne, lead vocals, piano, guitar, percussion, bass. Bev Bevan on drums, Bill Hunt on French horn and hunting horn. That's an interesting instrument.
Correct, yeah.
And Steve Woolham on violin. And a quote from Roy Wood leads this chapter. The goal of ELO is to take up where I Am the Walrus left off and to present it on stage. The Beatles, they had a huge influence on ELO.
Sure. I mean, specifically, yeah, I Am the Walrus. It's got the soaring cellos on, a really kind of prominent cello piece in it. And I think the idea was to take that, a small string section, a couple of cellos, and see if we could just take that and make that, once again, part of a touring band where the strings have as much relevance and prominence as the electric instruments. So Roy and Jeff are talking about this idea. Jeff's in the Move. He joins in January 1970, June 1970. The Move need a B-side for a single called When Alice Comes Back to the Farm. And Jeff has this song, which he says is based on a big riff, big fat riff. And they record the backing track for this song. We spend all day recording it on a Sunday I think it's July 1970. All day recording it. And then Bev Bevan and Rick Price, the Move's bassist at that point, go back to Birmingham on the train, leaving just Jeff and Roy in the studio. And in the studio, Roy has this cello he's just bought. And they look at it and they think, hang on, why don't we try and make an ELO song now based on this B-side they recorded? So they spend all night, Roy spends all night adding what he calls Jimi Hendrix riffs to this song, which becomes 10538 Overture. And that really was, they said, okay, we've got it. This is the first ELO song. And then they take this song to the record company, say, look, we've got this song. We don't want it to be a Move song. We want it to be an ELO song, Electric Light Orchestra song. And the record company are a bit kind of, well, really? I mean, this is quite a gamble. But I said, okay, you can carry on with the ELO album as long as you keep recording as the Move. Because the Move was still popular, still having hit singles. And kind of, yeah, so they were using kind of the Move as a sweetener to get finance for the ELO album.
Yeah, because they're thinking money here. The Move is still making that label money.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, the Move's final single, California Man, was in the UK charts at exactly the same time as ELO's first single, 10538 Overture, in July 1972.
I'm just thinking, too, Barry, of one of your fellow Sonic Bond publishing authors, John Vanderkist, put out a book, 1970, The Year in Rock. John, I think he pointed to the song What. I could be wrong. I got to listen to it back. But I think the song What was very ELO-like, I believe.
Yeah, it's the Jeff Lynne song. And right. It is really, to me, it sounds right at home on the ELO's second album, which Jeff Lynne had full control of. And it is, yeah, it's really kind of, the seeds of ELO are in that song. It's dramatic. It's got strings. It's quite long, but it's quite an unknown song, really. But yeah, that's Jeff Lynne's first Move song was What.
Now, let's go back to 10538 Overture, which is such a great song. What a song to start off on. The very first ELO song recorded. And it's really classic ELO. It's among, if you go to the streaming services, it's up there in the top 10 to 20 ELO songs, which is saying a lot because this is just the band starting out here. How does this song come together? What's the meaning of the title?
So I guess they wanted something pseudo-classical. They know that this is Electric Light Orchestra, so they're thinking of, they've got this song recorded, they've got some lyrics, the lyrics are a bit dystopian, a bit futuristic about this guy that's running and being followed by people. I think it's a kind of a big brother, a bit 1984, but in the 1970s, 1984, of course, was well in the future. So I think they kind of thinking, okay, maybe it's some sort of overture, but we need kind of a futuristic year for it. So they've recorded the song, they've got the lyrics down, and they're thinking, okay, what are we going to call this song? Something overture. And they're looking around the studio, and then On the mixing desk, you've got these EQ modules, and the model number for all of them are 1053. A Neve 1053 EQ module if you're interested. And I think, we'll use that. 1053 Overture. Well, that sounds doesn't sound quite right, doesn't scan. So, and Roy says, okay, we'll call it 1053 8 Overture. And then suddenly we have the song title. And I think it's a great song, and it's a really great title as well to announce this new band.
And they have that legendary group, Hypnosis, who famously did those classic Pink Floyd album covers. They designed the cover of this album. And there's an interesting story behind this in your book. It's taken at the location where Charles I of England was just before he was beheaded.
Yeah, that's correct. So he used to be part of the palace, which is no longer there. It's called Whitehall Palace. And all that's left of it now is this big hall called the Banqueting House. And it's actually in central London, just about opposite Downing Street, where the Prime Minister currently lives in London. And the Banqueting House was where King Charles I was led through to go to the scaffold and then executed in January 1649. If you look at the front cover of the album, you can see the Banqueting House, and if you flip it over, you can see the ceiling painted by Rubens. And that cover kind of ties in with a lot of particularly Roy Wood's content of the album, because you've got a song in there called The Battle of Marston Moor, which was in 1664, 5 years before King Charles was executed. And a lot of Roy's songs have this kind of medieval 17th century vibe about them on the album. So it's quite an iconic cover. And you've got that really big light bulb on the front, which is in fact a lamp, which was sold through, I don't know if you have it in the USA, a chain called Habitat, quite a high-end furniture shop. But it's a really striking cover. And once again, it kind of just fits in with the content and the songs within. I really like it.
And the debut album gets great reviews, and now the band, they're ready to hit the road. They recruit musicians for a touring band, but this debut tour doesn't go off as Roy and Jeff had hoped. You write those first shows were shambolic affairs. What happened during these early shows?
That's straight from the horse's mouth. So I think in the book we've got quotes from Roy, we've got quotes from Jeff, and we've got quotes from Bev, all saying the same thing. These shows were awful. I mean, I'm far too young to have been there and witnessed them for myself, but the tour's announced and cancelled several times. And it seems that once the tour got going, once they got the right musicians in place, the big issue was amplifying the strings. In the UK, particularly at that point, the technology wasn't there or they hadn't considered the technology to get a really good sound from the strings. So all they did was they took normal acoustic mics and shoved them into the cellos and attached them to the violins. And apparently there was feedback and the balance. The guitars were playing loud, so they would turn up the strings to compensate, and then you'd get feedback, and you got leads all over the stage. And you got the added complication as well of Roy Wood, multi-instrumentalist, wanting to play loads of different instruments on stage. He wants to play a cello, he wants to play a saxophone, he wants to play guitar. So he's swapping those instruments around between songs. He's got dark glasses on. According to Bev Bevan's book, he's tripping over cables, trying to get in place. And
yeah, I love that.
Gaps between songs. So the band will say those gigs were pretty bad. They sounded bad and they weren't really well attended at all. But there is a TV performance captured in a TV studio from May 1972, around the same time that band were touring. And within the TV studio, they sound really good. They don't sound anything like those live descriptions at all. Everything seems well balanced and they're playing together. And I'm really grateful we've got that performance, because I know it's good to print the legend, but they were a pretty tight band in the right environment, I think.
Sure, it was just a matter of time before they would all gel, but Roy Wood, he abruptly leaves the band in the summer of 1972 during the tour. He later said he left with true regret. He refutes the story that he and Jeff were at odds. What happened there?
Yeah, so Roy Wood was very well known in the UK at that point, and his name was attached to the band. There were reviews mentioning Roy and hardly any credit to Jeff. Now, I don't know how that affected the relationship between them, but I know Roy certainly felt that Jeff wasn't getting the credit he deserved for the contribution he was making. In Bev Bevan's book, he says that Roy and Jeff were kind of having these little discussions about who would go on stage first or who would go on stage last, really. But I think the management saw that And I think Roy thinks that the management then sowed some seeds of dissent between the two. And there's a school of thought that thinks ELO's management thought, okay, we've got Jeff here who's written this hit, 105 Feet Overture, and we've got Roy who can write other hits as well. Maybe we could split these two up and have two bands going at the same time. We don't know what happened, but Roy Wood left abruptly during a tour or just after a tour in June, July 1972, and took some of ELO with him and formed his own band. Now, you're right, Roy now regrets that and does blame bad advice or bad management to doing that.
If they were older and more experienced, they probably could have worked things out differently. But
I think so. But correct. I think they could have worked things out differently if they stayed together. And Roy is on a couple of tracks on ELO's second album, uncredited at the time. But also I think that Roy and Jeff, if you look at that first album, had slightly different ideas of what ELO should be. Roy's kind of going for the full Baroque stuff, really string-based stuff with hardly any group on it at all. Jeff's stuff, you can see the roots of what became ELO in Jeff's 5 songs on that first album. They're more traditional rock songs with string embellishments, whereas Roy's songs are just out and out string-based and slightly wacky, esoteric songs. So, I mean, Roy went on to have a massive success in the UK with Wizard, so it worked for him, and of course it worked for ELO as well, with Jeff taking over.
And he was rightly so inducted into the Hall of Fame with the band as a whole years later, which was certainly deserved, because, and that's the thing, a lot of people, they go to Jeff Lynne's name right away when they think ELO, but Roy Wood is an important part of this history, of this story. And it needs to be told that he was there at the beginning. It was his idea.
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many what-ifs associated with what would have happened if ELO hadn't formed. I mean, Jeff Lynne is just such a huge, massive talent, genius songwriter, but he wasn't having any success at all with his band, The Idle Race, and they produced with him 2 really, really strong albums, which just did nothing at all. And that's one of the big what-ifs, isn't it? What would have happened to Jeff Lynne without ELO, without Roy Wood?
Now we go to ELO 2, released March of 1973. Jeff Lynne, he's now at the helm. He co-produced the debut with Roy Wood. He's the sole producer here. A reformed lineup on this album. The standout track is the band's cover of Chuck Berry's Roll Over Beethoven. It was a number 6 single in the UK, number 42 in the US. Jeff weaves in elements of works from Beethoven, which you write made the song such a success.
Yeah, I think so. I think the band really needed a follow-up single to their hits. In many ways, 105 Feet Overture was a real novelty at the time. It's like nothing else in the charts at the time, but obviously you need a second hit. What are we going to do? So they're playing Roll Over Beethoven live, and they've added the introduction to his 5th Symphony at the start of it. And it's just such an obvious choice for a follow-up single. People know the song already. The Beatles have done it. Of course, Chuck Berry's done it. But it's a really different take on the song. I think it's probably one of the best cover versions of any song, because they've taken it and made something different out of it and made it their own, weaving in these classical elements. And in a way, it's kind of another novelty single, but I think they really had to do it in order to kind of get ELO back out there and back in the charts. And it's like Jeff Lynne's, it's inspired to have done that, to release Roll Over Beethoven.
It's a familiar song, but also at the same time, it's introducing that ELO sound to the audience, which is really so Jeff Lynne. He puts his own spin on it, and it becomes almost an ELO song on its own, as if they wrote it themselves. It's really cool.
Absolutely. It's the mark of a great cover version, isn't it? When you can take a song and make it so different, it sounds like it's your song. And I think what's good about Roll Over Beethoven is the string parts are all highlighted, especially in the long version, the 8-minute version. Each part of the band has the opportunity to come forward and do their piece within the song and come back again. And it all blends and weaves together so well.
Do we know if Chuck Berry ever commented on that? Was he happy with how it came out?
No, I'm not aware of any comments from Chuck Berry. No, Chuck, I'm sure he just appreciated the money.
Exactly. Yeah, he'll just cash the check, no problem.
I mean, Chuck Berry was, in fact, when Roll Over Beethoven hit the charts, I think Chuck Berry was number 1 in the UK at the time with My Ding-a-Ling. Don't know if you know that song.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that they were At least they were either recording at that time or it was in the charts when One of the Beethoven came out.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. We're talking with Barry Delve, whose book ELO, Every Album, Every Song is out now. The third album from ELO is one Jeff Lynne wanted fans and the media to consider to be the first true ELO album. On the Third Day, released in November of 73 in the U.S., the following month released in the U.K. Originally intended to be a double album, Showdown, the band's third single, comes from this album, another classic ELO song. Jeff Lynne rates it as among his best, and he said he knew right away this was going to be a hit, and it was. Number 12 in the UK, spent 12 weeks on the charts. In the US, goes to number 53. He wrote it in his mom and dad's front room in Birmingham. You agree, saying in the book that it is as good as anything ELO ever recorded and the foundation for the hits that would follow in the years to come.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Showdown's a classic, isn't it? If you know ELO, you know Showdown. And there's a John Lennon comment on YouTube where he loved it. He's really bigging this song up. He himself says in that clip that they're carrying on from the Beatles. Showdown's such a great song. And I think it is. I think you can see the roots of Evil Woman in that song, Living Thing. Last Train to London, even, with the kind of this prominent bass line. And it's kind of, you've got the backing vocals in it for the first time on an ELO hit song. You've got this crazy bit after the guitar solo, which is Mike Edwards, a cello player, double tracked over and over and over to get this kind of weird cello-y bit, and then it all crashes down again with the vocals. It's typical ELO, and I think out of those first three singles, it's their most important one because it's kind of, this is, okay, you can take it seriously now. This is a proper song. It's a classic. And Jeff Lynne says, he was recording it and he was in the studio and the engineer himself said to him, hey, this is going to be a big hit. And it was.
And it helps the album On the Third Day go to number 52 on the U.S. album charts, 10 spots higher than the second album. So their star is rising fast now. September of 74, they released El Dorado. It's released in the UK January of 75. Their first to earn gold status for 500,000 copies sold. Number 16 album in the U.S. This is their first full concept album. What is the concept of El Dorado?
El Dorado is really interesting. So On the Third Day is just two cellos and a violin, overdubbed and overdubbed to get a big sound. By the time of El Dorado, ELO are doing really well in the USA, really well, pulling in some money, selling out stadium, and there's some money behind the band. So Jeff says, okay, I want to do an album with a full orchestra now. I'm tired of overdubbing these strings all the time. I want to do something big. And of course, with this big thing, this big full orchestra, he gets this idea of doing a concept album and using the orchestra to weave in orchestral bits all through and tie all the songs together. And the concept of the album is of a guy trapped in a 9-to-5, working in a really mundane job who he really hates, but every night he has a dream, and the dreams are all in this place he's constructed for himself called El Dorado. And the songs are kind of all individual, but there's a song about Robin Hood, there's a song about the Crusades, there's a song set at sea, and each song is a separate dream that he has in this place he goes to escape from his mundane life. It's a really good album, El Dorado.
Let's talk about the album cover, the Wizard of Oz themed album cover. This wasn't the original idea. Can you talk about what the band wanted initially and what United Artist designer, I believe it's pronounced John Keehee, is it Keehee?
I'm not sure myself. Yeah. I call him John Kay, but I don't know.
Okay, yeah. There was his idea. How does it end up being the cover we now know of?
Yeah, so John, we call him John, shall we? So I've exchanged a few messages with John. He told me quite a lot about this. He was the in-house designer, United Artists, a graphic designer, and he was assigned ELO as his first gig with UA. And he did the US cover from The Third Day, and then he got El Dorado. And he spoke to the band about what they wanted. And he said the band suggested to him they wanted to dress in tuxedos and descend a giant staircase of piano keys. And I think he quite rightly thought, well, that's a bit cheesy. To me, that sounds like very Liberace. So he thought, no, I'm going to do something else. And he had this idea of making a model of the legendary lost city of El Dorado. So he did that. He made one out of coloured plexiglass and took it out into the Californian desert and photographed it at sunrise to kind of get this cover he wanted that would evoke what El Dorado is, this legendary, dreamy lost city. But he looked at it and he said to me, it just looked cheesy. It's just as cheesy as the piano idea. So he just scrapped it. And he's up against a deadline now, and he was in Hollywood, and he stopped at a bookstore, Larry Edmonds Cinema Bookshop. And in there, out of desperation, he's just looking around for ideas. And in there, they've got boxes of scenes from famous films cut into 35 millimeter slides. So they've taken the film print and just cut it up and made slides out of them. He's looking through and he sees the Wizard of Oz box. Okay, well, Wizard of Oz, that's set in a kind of dream world too, isn't it? But he kind of instantly thought how dynamic Dorothy's slippers looked, and he thought that would make a really good cover. So he mocked up a cover for El Dorado with the cover we now know, with the slippers on. He takes that to Don Arden, the manager, and the band, and they're just going, what is this? Why have you put socks and slippers on our album cover? Because in the UK, The Wizard of Oz at that point meant nothing. It was released in 1939, and it didn't even get a TV debut until a year after El Dorado was released.
So I didn't know that. That's interesting.
No. Yeah, so I know in the USA, it was a massive thing, wasn't it? It's a fixture of Christmas TV from the 50s onwards.
Absolutely, yeah.
But it didn't resonate with the band because Wizard of Oz did not have that cultural integration that it has in the USA.
All he does is just add that there's like that yellowish sparkle effect to it. That's something he did. Or is that?
No, that's a clip from the film. I actually went through the film to find that exact clip.
Oh, so all of that is, okay, so he didn't have to do any additional, finishing touches?
The only thing they've done is they flipped the image from left to right for some reason. It's backwards. But no, that's just a frame. That's when the witch is trying to get the slippers off Dorothy's feet, and she can't, and it's all sparking. So I think it's towards the end of the film where Dorothy has seen the wizard and she goes back to the witch takes her away to her place. I mean, I'm a graphic designer as well by day, and it's always the idea that's the hardest thing rather than the execution of the idea. It's making those connections, and I think it really, really helped the album in the USA because of how embedded into culture The Wizard of Oz is and was at that point, and it really helped sell the album.
Let's talk about the top 10 track, Can't Get You Out of My Head. This came as a result of something Jeff Lynne's dad told him.
Yes, ELO weren't having much success in the UK at all. So obviously Jeff's from the UK, his family all in the UK, and Jeff tells his story himself much better than me. But Jeff was probably feeling a bit low because ELO just, at that point, their albums weren't charting at all. The first album to chart in the UK was a New World Record in 1976. So this was 1974. They weren't kind of getting the recognition in our own country that they were getting in the USA. And I think there was a bit of discussion with his dad, and Jeff's dad says to him, well, the trouble with your tunes is they got no tunes in them. Because Jeff is, I think at this point, really trying to work out what ELO are, what they should be. And he's a natural tunesmith. If you look at the Idle Race songs he did, they're really good poppy tunes. And I think he's trying to second guess what ELO should sound like. And you can see that in the second album where they're trying different things, and on the third day where they start to nail it. But kind of with El Dorado, he's thinking, okay, I'm going to start to do this my way now. I'm going to forget about the pretensions, as he called them. I'm just going to write the songs that I want to write. So his dad says to him, well, your tunes have got no tunes. And he says, right, I'll show you. I'm going to write a tune that's just full of tunes. And he writes Can't Get Out of My Head, which I think is, I know we said Showdown is a really great song, but I think Can't Get Out of My Head is their first classic song. That's one of those songs that you know, but you might not know who it's by. And it goes gold in the USA, I believe, and in the top 10.
Those songs that he did with the previous band, are those available? Can we find those on streaming services?
Sure. I think they're on streaming services. You can buy them as real albums.
The Idle Race.
The Idle Race, there's a really good compilation of all of their stuff, including the album that they did after Jeff left called Back to the Story. And it's got pretty much everything the Idle Race did on them. Lyrically, they're a bit strange, but they're pure Jeff Lynne, pure pop. They're well worth checking out. There's a great one called Skeleton and the Roundabout, which is written by Jeff Lynne, which is pure pop. And the first album they did is kind of a bit out there, really quirky. That's called Birthday Party. And then they did an album the year after called Idle Race, which is a much more mature album. And it's got a song called Come With Me on, and Sea of Dreams. They're just Jeff Lynne all over them, but they're not hits.
I'll add those to our playlist. In the show notes page, people can click on the link and we create a playlist, a Spotify playlist. Sure. And fortunately, it's not a Neil Young playlist because those songs won't be there.
Shame.
That's for a whole other podcast. But let's talk about the title track to El Dorado. In your opinion, not only the album's great achievement, but an overlooked jewel in the ELO catalog. There's a juxtaposing of verse and chorus singing styles that you point out in the book.
Yeah, I think so. I think this is where the concept album really comes together. So it's a collection of songs, but there is a real concept in this album of a guy who hates his life, but has constructed this world, this imaginary world, which he retreats to when he's not working. And this final song, El Dorado, is a really powerful song. The lyrics and the singing go really well together. There's a real hint of resignation in the verses of just my life is really not that great and I'm really looking to get to this place. And then you get to these really soaring choruses about I'm going to get back to, I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I'm going to get back there. And Jeff really lets go on the singing there. It's kind of almost like Roy Orbison in places, the way he sings these choruses. But it's just about a guy trying to find a way to permanently get to this place called El Dorado. It's kind of left up to ourselves to find out how he gets there, but I think it's pretty clear.
You bring up Roy Orbison. He was a huge Roy Orbison fan. I think he talked about that when he looked back on his time working with Roy with the Traveling Wilburys. And I think he produced one of Roy's solo albums, didn't he?
Yeah, he produced some songs on the Mystery Girl album.
What are the influences there for Jeff Lynne? What were his favorite artists and bands growing up?
I think Jeff's three main influences were the Beatles, Del Shannon, and Roy Orbison. And he produced all of them. So that's some life, isn't it? Where you grow up really liking a band, liking some artists, and you end up working with them.
Absolutely.
So those are his big influences. And I think as ELO developed and on the recent Jeff Lynne's ELO albums, there are some real proper homages to Roy Orbison on those albums, which maybe we'll talk about when we get there.
For the most part, what are his lyrics mostly? They come to him fairly quickly. He talks about he can, boom, write a song pretty quickly. Well,
yeah. I mean, Jeff has always said he hates writing the words. He hates writing the lyrics. So for him, it's all about the music. And ELO recorded songs in quite an unusual way. They would record the full backing track completely with all the bits and pieces on, and then Jeff would go away and write the lyrics. We've got examples later on where he's changing the lyrics and changing the melody. The backing track's always the same, but he'll come up with different melodies for these backing tracks. It's amazing how he does it, but I don't know if he's quite unique in doing that. But he kind of say, oh, I've got to write the lyrics again. And he'll just knock them out in a couple of days for a whole album. And then they'd record the lyrics for all the songs in one go. They'd have all the backing tracks ready. And then, okay, we're going to do the words now, guys. And he'd just spend a couple of days just doing the words for all these songs in one go.
And we're at that point now, mid-70s in this storyline. He is a prolific songwriter. He is cranking out the songs. We get to Face the Music, which was released in October of 1975 in the U.S., November of 75 in the U.K., a top 10 album, another gold record, Fire on High, one of the best instrumentals in rock history. I remember when I first heard it on the radio, I actually thought, Barry, this was a Rush song. Is that crazy to think? I don't know. I
get that completely with those 12-string guitars and everything going on. I mean, it's a massive step up from El Dorado again. In the book, I think I say it's kind of an overlooked album because either side of it, you've got El Dorado, which was the breakthrough album, and then on the other side of it, you've got a New World Record, which the band exploded worldwide with. So Face the Music is kind of a bit overlooked, but Fire and High is a magnificent track, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's instrumental. I think, was it used in the USA for a talk show or something?
Yeah.
The CD was spectacular.
That may have been where I also heard it too. But of course, there's the backward satanic message controversy here, right? This is one of the songs the Christian groups claimed had backward satanic messages. What was it that they thought they heard, and what is it that we really hear at the start of this track?
Well, it's really clear what the message is. If you're like me and you had a turntable in the 70s, You just put your finger on the turntable and push it backwards, and you can hear exactly what that is.
You did it too. You did it too. All right.
Yeah, of course. It's, the track starts, it's really atmospheric. I think it's trying to conjure up like a haunted house or something. And you've got this eerie voice, which is Bev Bevan, actually, the drummer, saying backwards, music is reversible, but time is not. Turn back, turn back, turn back. And that's the message. And it's not masked. It's really obvious what it is. It's just a bit of backward talking. But yeah, this was pulled up by Christian groups in the USA as evidence that groups were hiding messages in their songs. I don't know what the message is there. Do you? I mean, it's just
little do they know that they were just promoting these albums that much more.
Absolutely.
Kiss talked about that when Kiss was Knights in Satan's Service, Kids in Satan's Service. And they just said, go ahead, roll with it, because we could use the publicity. And that's what it did. It just sold more albums.
I think Jeff Lynne's on record saying he's actually quite upset by these accusations.
He was, yeah.
And I think he said he found it hard enough to get it right forwards, let alone backwards.
Yeah.
And I think they pulled out a line in El Dorado, a song we just spoke about, where the initial lines, here it comes, another lonely day, playing the game, I'll sail away and I've always no return to sea. When played backwards is, they came up with, he is the nasty one, Christ you're infernal, it's said we're dead, everyone who has the mark will live. I've tried to find that as well, and it's a bit like the Led Zeppelin. I listened to the one you did with Steve where you were talking about Stairway to Heaven. With a bit of imagination, it's there, but
it really is it just comes off as silly, and it made those Christian groups just look just foolish, because it's not something that Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, the fact that they even had to answer those questions, they must have just been like, this is just so silly.
I know, it's just crazy, isn't it? And as I said, like Jeff Lynne said, it's hard enough to get this stuff done right forwards, let alone backwards. In the 80s, when he was struggling for something to do, he thought, okay, I'm going to do a whole album of these, because I think the whole backward message thing kind of erupted in the early 80s, really, didn't it?
It did.
I think it's around the time of the Secret Messages album.
It did, yeah. But again, Jeff had fun with it. We'll get to that. But let's stick with this album. A couple of classic ELO singles on Face the Music, the U.S. Top 20, Strange Magic, and we have Evil Woman. Evil Woman is their first worldwide hit, number 10 in the U.S. and U.K., the fastest song Jeff Lynne ever wrote. What's the story behind this one, Evil Woman?
Yeah, he reckons he did it in 30 minutes. So
wow.
They're in Germany recording Face the Music, and he's a song short. He thinks it's finished, but I need another song. So with ELO, it was always about time. They did tour, record all the time up until about 77. So they had no time. So they have to finish this album. So he says to the guys in the band, okay, you go out, play a game of football, soccer, and come back about half an hour and see what I've got. And he says he just walked up to the piano and just started banging these chords on it. A minor, E minor, D minor, then up to C, and then right back again, over and over. And he's got the words Evil Woman, he's singing along with it. And that's it. In half an hour, he's got this song done. And they record it the same day, and they record the words the following day. And they keep the title Evil Woman because he couldn't think of anything else to call it.
30 minutes to come up with a song that will be played in generations to come, forever and ever, probably. It's mind-blowing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that must blow the artist's mind, too, when they come up with a song that quickly and it takes off like it does.
Absolutely. It's like lightning in a bottle, isn't it? I guess you spend all your time trying to work out how am I going to be able to do that again ever, and will it ever happen? And in Evil Woman, there's a really nice bit. There's a piano solo, and then you've got this string bit, which is actually an excerpt from the following song, Night Rider, which Jeff has cut, reverse, and then cut into Evil Woman. And he calls those bits whizzits, the little bits he puts into songs to make them what he calls less boring. So there's a really nice bit in there, which is a reverse bit of a different song.
Brilliant. Face the Music in the books as a success, but the next album takes ELO even higher, a new world record released in October of 1976, November of 76 in the UK. This reaches number 6 in the UK, number 5 in the US. This marks the first time we see that recognizable, iconic ELO logo. It's featured on the album cover. You spoke with John Kosh. He's the former art director at Apple Records. You talked to him about this album. cover and that iconic logo. What did he have to tell you about creating this logo?
John's a really nice man, and his assistant Bob was really helpful as well. Yeah, John Case moved on, and John Kosh is brought in to do the cover for New World Records. So ELO did have a logo before then, which was based on the General Electric logo, but they were asked to stop using that because it was really close to that logo. So John Kosh has this instruction to design a cover for the album, something that's going to be really recognisable. So he thinks, okay, I'm going to come up with another logo for the band. And his father was a salesman for Wurlitzer jukeboxes. So he's got some catalogues lying around, and he makes this logo based on a Wurlitzer jukebox. And if you look at it, you can see it's the Wurlitzer, isn't it? It's based on the 1015 Wurlitzer, and there's a circular speaker which goes with that, the 4008. And that is a Wurlitzer logo with a riff on the General Electric logo in the middle. And that was hand painted. And actually the original image was 4 foot by 4 foot, John told me. It's enormous. And then they photograph it and shrink it down for the album. And also on there, you've got the Northern Lights in the background, which John said he's flying over the Arctic and he saw them. He thought, oh, that would make a great cover, great background for that logo. And then on the back cover, you've got the 7 stars, which are also taken from a Wurlitzer sales brochure.
That's cool. The Northern Lights. That's what we see behind the logo there.
Yeah, on the back cover as well.
Beautiful album cover at a time when album covers were really important. Record stores, if you walked in there, the folks that own record stores strategically placed albums in just the right place up front. If they had that real beautiful album cover, it would get people's attention. And this one did.
It was the first album I ever bought as well with my own money. £2.75 it cost. And I remember picking it up, and it's embossed as well. If you run your fingers over it, it's embossed. It's a lot of detail on that cover.
Do you still have it?
Yeah, I've still got it. Of course,
cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Played to death, but I've still got that. I've got all my albums still, yeah.
I'm kicking myself because the first album I ever bought was The Police Synchronicity, and I cannot find it. And I bought it with my paper route money at a place called Caldor's here in the U.S. I don't know if they had it in the UK, but 1983. So, yeah, I envy you. You still have that album. I can't find my very first album that I bought.
Horrible that.
3 huge singles from this album. Living Thing, number 4 in the UK, 13 in the US. Do Ya, number 24 in the US. Telephone Line, number 8 in the UK, 7 in the US. Rock Aria, also a hit in the UK, hits top 10 there. I want to ask you about Living Thing, a great story that tells you how much of a songwriting machine Jeff Lynne was. Talk about prolific. The track is finished. He decides, doesn't like the lyrics, rewrites the words in the studio, and again, 30 minutes. Something about 30 minutes with him. What were the original lyrics about?
There's a clue what the original lyrics were about from the sound of the song. You listen to that violin at the beginning, and that's kind of, I call it like an Andalusian vibe. It's a Spanish feel to the whole song. And the original lyrics were about a holiday in Spain. We don't know anything more about it. Jeff himself has said that. But he did that a few times. He did it with Sweet Talking Woman, or From Out of the Blue was originally called Dead End Street. That had a set of lyrics that he didn't like, and there's a story that he doesn't like the words, so he goes down and tells the engineer, Mac, just to wipe it clean, and he's going to re-record them. And he did that a few times on Secret Messages. Rock and Roll is King was originally called Motor Factory, and there's some noises on that song which are still there, like clanging sounds, which are meant to evoke the sounds of a motor factory. But once again, he didn't like that, and he redid it as Rock and Roll is King. And then on Balance of Power, the original ELO's last album, on the CD reissue, you've got some bonus tracks. And we've got a real-life example of 2 states of the same song. We've got a song where it's the same backing track, but 2 completely different sets of lyrics and melodies. And that's Caught in a Trap and In for a Kill. They're the same backing track, but 2 very different songs. And that's we were kind of treated to a real example of how he worked. If he wasn't happy with something, he would just rip it all off and start again and do something very different. I don't think any of these survive. I'd love to hear the Holiday in Spain song and the Dead End Street songs, but
maybe someday. I would think Jeff has the tape somewhere.
I think it's a bit of mystery where a lot of these master tapes ended up, to be honest. But I just think it's an example of how much of a perfectionist Jeff Lynne became. And it's something that wasn't quite right, we didn't quite like. No qualms about wiping everything completely off and starting all over again until it was right. I mean, even with Living Thing, they'd finished the album, they take it to be mastered in Los Angeles. And just before they're committing the album to vinyl or tape or cassette, he brings in some backing vocalists and gets them to add some vocals to Living Thing, literally hours or days before it's going to be cut. It's just how he was working all the time, constantly changing and altering things till he's really happy with them.
ELO's seventh studio album, Out of the Blue, released in October of 1977 in the UK, November in the US, and it reaches number 4 in both countries. United Artists wanted ELO to capitalize on the live album craze of the mid-70s. They wanted a live album in the mold of Frampton Comes Alive, but Jeff said no to this. Why did he say no?
Well, ELO had already done a live album, which got a limited release, which they were really unhappy with, called The Night the Light Went On in Long Beach. Came out in 74, and basically they used the wrong tapes to put the album out. They didn't use the master tapes, they used dubs of the tapes for some reason, and it sounds, to Jeff Lynne, it sounded pretty awful. It sounds great to me, but he was really unhappy with it. And he would always rather do something new than go back and just reissue a live album. He was always trying to hone, he was never happy with the sound of ELO live anyway, especially once they started using orchestras, because the compromises they had to make to get those orchestral sounds reproduced on stage. So he said, well, I'm not really keen on a live album, but give me a double studio and I'll deliver that for you. And a week or so later, he gets the call, yeah, go ahead, do a double album. And off he goes and does it Out of the Blue. Yeah, another great cover by John Kosh. So John Kosh, who did New World Record, he's got the cover for Out of the Blue. Not sure what to do. He's got a sticker, which he's put on his son's Frisbee, sticker of the album cover, New World Record. He's got it on his son's Frisbee, throws it across the air. Wow, yeah, an ELO spaceship. And that becomes the cover for Out of the Blue.
This is beautiful. This is very Star Wars-like. And the singles from Out of the Blue, boy, here we go again. Just another batch of huge singles. Top 20, Turn to Stone. Mr. Blue Sky, top 10 in the UK, top 20 in the US. Sweet Talking Woman, top 10 UK, top 20 in the US, along with Wild West Hero and It's Over. Those are the singles. Again, Jeff Lynne, he's cranking out song after song at an incredible pace, which also I would think is why he didn't want to do a live album, because he's probably thinking, I'm on a roll, man. Don't stop me now. We're not doing a live album. I've got more songs, and he did have more songs. Mr. Blue Sky, declared by scientists in 2018 as the happiest song in the world. Talk about this song and how Jeff Lynne completed it. You say in the book that it was the hardest song for him to write.
That's right. So the New World Record tour finishes in April 77, and they got studio time booked in May to start recording Out of the Blue. He's got a month. And actually, he hasn't got any songs, and for the first time in his life, he's got writer's block. And for 2 weeks, he can't come up with anything for Out of the Blue. And he starts off, and eventually he gets Turned to Stone going, and once he's got Turned to Stone, the floodgates open and all these songs start pouring out of him. He says to Ben, I just can't stop. I've got so many songs. The hardest song, he says, was Mr. Blue Sky. And struggling for inspiration, he's rented a chalet in Switzerland to write this album, but the weather's really bad. But one day he gets up, pulls back the curtains, and wow, blue skies everywhere. And that's the inspiration he gets to write Mr. Blue Sky. But it still doesn't come easy to him. And he says in the sleeve notes for the Out of the Blue reissue, he spent like 9 hours pounding the piano over and over and over just to get Mr. Blue Sky out of him. But it paid off in spades. In fact, just before we did this interview, I heard it on the radio. It's on the radio all the time here. And it's one of those songs that, once again, that you might not know who it's by, but you sure know that song, particularly in the UK.
It's fascinating to listen to artists talk about writer's block, too, what gets them out of it. Sometimes they work towards getting out of it, and some just say, got to step back and just let it come back to me. But I think Sting was the one. Sting talked about that because he had a writer's block. And I think he said he stopped thinking about writing songs in the mindset of himself and look outside of himself, I think was something like that. But whatever it takes to make that switch and get into the next phase of your songwriting career, because I can imagine how you don't want to write the same song over and over again.
Was Sting the sole writer for the Police? Was he did he write all the songs, or was they band?
He wrote, what they did with each album, I mean, he really could have written all of the songs on every album, but they had a format where Andy Summers, the guitarist, and Stuart Copeland, the drummer, would get one song each on an album. But Sting was the guy. He was the one that wrote all the hits, all the major hits. And he got to that point, and I want to say it was maybe early 2000s, but I believe he had a writer's block twice. I think he had it in 91, and then he had it again, I think, in the early 2000s. But when you're the guy, this is Jeff Lynne's, he had the same situation. Pressure's on him. It's all on their shoulders.
Jeff wrote all the songs for Yellow. I mean, what pressure that must have been. And you're being urged by management to repeat that success. So our New World record is massive worldwide, and you've got to do it again and again and again. And that pressure must have been enormous to be on one person's shoulders. I mean,
Sure.
Paid off a spade. So, I mean, I Missed the Blue Sky. It wasn't actually a big hit. It was in the UK. It did really well, got top 10, but I don't think it wasn't much of a hit in the USA. I think it got in the 30s. And it was released in January in the UK, funnily enough. Really strange song to release in winter. But
it was a long distance hit. It gets better with time.
Absolutely.
It connects with each generation that follows, and it just takes off. Like you say, some people don't even know it's by ELO. They just know the song. Once they hear it, boom, they know.
No, and Jeff Lynne has since said it, it captured everything I wanted ELO to be. And you've got everything in that song, from the backing vocals, the sliding cellos, the sound effects, the big orchestral finish. It's just, and the crazy vocoder, Mr. Blue Sky in the solo. It's just everything comes together, and it's just the most enthusiastic, happy song there is. And it's just magnificent, a real work of art. And I'm really glad that it's kind of embedded itself in everyone's heads now. Everyone knows that song. And you think, can I ever listen to that song again? And it comes on the radio, and you stop what you're doing, and you listen to it, and it's a real mood lifter.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. Barry Dell's book, ELO, Every Album, Every Song, it's out now. We reached the end of the decade, and as you write, the peak of ELO. Discovery released on May 31st, 1979 in the UK. The following day, June 1st in the US. Number 1 in the UK, number 5 in the US. You take issue with those who feel Jeff abandoned the original ELO mission, and they say he sold his soul to disco.
Yeah, so, it has this, I think, undeserved reputation of being the disco album. The first single that was released, Shine Little Love, yeah, that is pure disco, but Showdown's pure Motown. And On the Third Day is not called the Motown album, is it? So I think you've got Shine Little Love, which is a kind of a disco song, and then, well, no, it's a very disco song, to be honest. And then you've got Last Train to London on the other side, which is kind of an ELO song with more disco inflections to it, but it's more of a proper ELO song. So there's those two songs which have given the album the reputation of being a disco album. I mean, I can see where people are coming from, particularly in the USA, because ELO at that point had been successful for 6 or 7 years in the USA, starting with those early hits, and they had a massive following. And if you look at the kind of trajectory and where Jeff Lynne was going with his songwriting, Discovery is very different from El Dorado. So I can see that if you're really into El Dorado and On the Third Day and Face the Music, by the time you get to Discovery, where the string section have gone, the two cellos and the violins have gone, the orchestra's dialed back a bit, and just really focusing on pop songs, I can see why people have that opinion of it. But 40 years on, looking at it now, it's a great album. Forget what came before it, what came after. Just look at it on its own as a piece of music. And Discovery is a really, really good album. And I think it's kind of, I say in the book, I think it's kind of almost an alternative Out of the Blue. It's where it could have gone after a New World record. It's not really a development of Out of the Blue. And I think there was kind of pressure on Jeff at that point to replicate that sort of success. A lot of money was invested in ELO and dependent on the band's success. And I think Jeff himself felt pressure to repeat the success of Out of the Blue and a New World record. And that's why he came up with Discovery. But maybe it wasn't the album he wanted to do at the time. But as an album, I think the songs are really strong on that album. I really think they are.
There is one song on there that's maybe among the most recognizable and most iconic ELO songs, Don't Bring Me Down. It's part of a batch of singles here. Whether people liked them or not, they were hits. We have Shine a Little Love. That went top 10. The UK top 10, The Diary of Horace Wimp. The US and UK top 5, Don't Bring Me Down, along with Confusion and Last Train to London. So Don't Bring Me Down, written, recorded, and mixed in a day. Essentially, this is a solo Jeff Lynne recording. And Jeff is not saying Bruce in the song. What's he really saying, and does it mean anything?
So Don't Bring Me Down. It's Jeff always says around this time, every album he does needs a loud one. And Discovery at this point doesn't have a loud one. So once again, solving the problem himself, he takes the drums from a different song on the run from that album, slows them down, and in a day and a night constructs Don't Bring Me Down by himself in the studio. And he's got a gap in the vocals, needs to fill it with something, and he just says the word Gruß. G-R-O-O-O or triple S. It means nothing, but the song is recorded in Germany, and the engineer, Mac, is German, and he says to Jeff, that means greetings in German. How did you know that? And Jeff says, I didn't. I just made this word up, Gruß. But it gets airplay, and they start playing it live, and everyone's singing along, and everyone's singing Bruce. Bruce, Jeff, Bruce. And finally, Jeff sings Bruce now, and it's Don't Bring Me Down, Bruce.
There's a great story. I know you've seen this interview too, because I think you cite it in your book. Yeah. His Sirius XM interview where he talks about Bruce Willis coming to concert to see him. Yeah. Bruce would come to ELO concerts, and Jeff Lynne would see him in the front row, and he would just point to Bruce and say, Bruce. And Bruce Willis got a kick out of that. I think it was in New York City when he would come to New York City and Bruce Willis would see him at Madison Square Garden or whatever. But
that's right. It's the Madison Square Garden concert. So that happened again with Showdown. There's a line in the original song where it goes, it's unreal, the suffering, and that became, it's a surreal submarine. And those are the lyrics that he sings now.
Yeah, it's just... Well, wasn't there the thought that, is he talking about Bruce Springsteen?
There may have been. I mean, once you start putting the word Bruce in there, you think, well, who the hell's Bruce? You know?
Bruce had the tendency to sing songs that were slightly depressing, so don't bring me down, Bruce. Yeah. I remember a few people told me that theory.
I don't think that's Jeff's style to comment on actual events or real things anyway, but that's a good maybe. Who knows? I think we could construct our own stories, don't we?
It's amazing what our imaginations can do, where it can take us. ELO begins the new decade by getting in the movie soundtrack business. Xanadu, released June of 1980. The movie starring Olivia Newton-John was a box office disaster, but the album was a huge success. Number 4 in the U.S., number 2 in the U.K., all over the world, a top 20 single in the UK and US. The biggest single from the album is the title track, which went to number 1 in 5 countries, including the UK. It's a number 8 single here in the US, and it's a song that Bev Bevan said should have taken a couple of hours, but it took 3 or 4 days. Can you talk about what caused the delay with the title track to Xanadu?
Yeah. So Jeff is commissioned to write the soundtrack, some songs for Xanadu. And he comes up with these songs, which he sends to the studio as demos, just himself recording them. But then they shoot the movie to the demos. And of course, it's all about timing and everything. But ELO haven't recorded the songs yet. So then they have to record the songs exactly with the same timings as the demos. And that's why it took so long, because they had to match everything up with the visuals, which had already been shot. So apparently Xanadu took 3 days to do or something. So it was a really convoluted way of recording these. I don't think Jeff knew that they were going to shoot the movie to the demos. So that's how it ended up like that.
It was a whole new world for them. They hadn't done soundtracks before. So
he had been asked to do a couple beforehand. I think it's rumoured that Alan Parker had asked him to do a couple of soundtracks to Midnight Express and possibly Fame as well. I don't know how true that story is. On the bonus tracks on A New World Record, there's a song called Surrender, which was apparently for a movie, but we don't know which one that was destined for. He never made the film.
Interesting.
But so he was asked, but it's all about schedules and timing. But after Discovery, ELO didn't tour, and he had time to schedule to do a soundtrack to a film. Unfortunately, he picked Xanadu, but it's a really strong selection of songs, as good as Discovery, and a real bridge into their next album, Time. I think he's starting to go to different places with these songs. It's somewhere a bit strange, and it's a really good lead into the next album, Time.
This is their second concept album, Time, released in the summer of 1981. Fans couldn't help but notice a lack of lush strings and massed choirs here. Instead, they hear more keyboards, and this is where Jeff Lynne wanted to take the band next, but it didn't pay off.
I don't think it paid off in the USA. It only hit number 16 in the USA, and the tour wasn't that well attended by all accounts. Hall & Oates were the support act, and they got to number 1 while they were supporting ELO, and Then they got promoted as a kind of joint show with ELO to sell a few tickets. But it did really well in the UK, went to #1. And I think it probably is the album that Jeff Lynne wanted to do after Out of the Blue. There's interviews around the time of the Out of the Blue tour where he's asking, what are you going to do next, Jeff? And Jeff says, I don't know what to do, but I really want to do something strange, something different. I think Time really does fulfill that. It's very different to what came before it, heavily synth-based, a different string arranger because Louis Clark, the usual arranger, wasn't available. So it's got a very different sound to the previous albums. I love Time. I think it's one of their strongest albums by far.
I got to give it a listen then based on your recommendation. I haven't heard the whole album, but I certainly have heard Hold On Tight, which that's the other thing about ELO. A lot of people have heard ELO songs and probably don't even realize it. A lot of commercials have ELO songs, and I just heard Hold On Tight. I can't recall what the product was, but Hold On Tight. It was in a commercial.
Yeah.
#4 in the UK, #10 in the US.
That was another almost solo recording by Jeff Lynne again. Time is just about finished. They go to LA with keyboard player Richard Tandy, and they record Hold On Tight with engineer Bill Bottrell in LA, the three of them. And it was released as the first single. It did really well in the UK again.
There's another song from this album I want to ask you about. This book includes quite a bit of research that has uncovered some interesting ELO mysteries. One that stands out for you has to do with the band's song Here Is the News, which is from the Time album. You were able to track down one of the voices we hear in the background of the song. Can you tell this story?
Yeah, sure. It's the kind of person I am. If I just kind of want to get to the bottom of things and find out things. There's so much you can't find out about ELO. There's so much mystery because the members are not particularly reticent about what they want to talk about. So you kind of you go to these people on the periphery and find out what they know. And so I was looking at Here Is the News. Had to write about the song, and I found a little interview with Bev Bevan. And he said, we used an AFN guy to make this news announcement. And I thought, okay, well, what's AFN? I have no idea. So I Google it, Air Forces Network, and then ELO recording the song in Germany at the time. And a bit of research, and I find out that AFN had a radio station just across the road from the studios where ELO were recording. Now, it's really unusual for ELO to use anyone outside of the band to be on the tracks. And most of the sound bites on Here Is the News are actually the band. Jeff Lynne says he wanted to make the song sound really frantic, and that's a really good description of it. But there's one piece in the song where it's a newsreader reading. So I guess they felt they wanted a proper newsreader. So I'm going through these websites, and I find this really old Yahoo website with an enter on it and a gif of a flag fluttering. And I have a look through there, and I start to just see if I can make any connections. And then I find some people that were in Munich around that time. And I make contact with the guy who I thought might have been the guy, the newsreader, but it wasn't him. It was a guy called Roger Williams. And he said, okay, I know a few guys, I'll ask around for you. And then within about 5 hours of starting work on this song, he gets back to me, says, yeah, I found the guy who did the news piece on that song. And it's a guy called Dick Dale, not the guitarist. He spoke to me, he let me know what happened. So they get Dick into the studio, they give him a napkin with these words on. It's just a short paragraph. And if you're listening to the song, it's the piece in the background. It starts off with the space workers dispute in London today and a lightning strike by air shuttle officers. You can hear that in the song, and that's Dick. He says, they gave me these words on a napkin, and I read them out into the microphone in one take. And then I said to them, hey, if you guys have a hit with this, I'm going to interview you on a radio station. He didn't have a clue who they were. He says, who are you anyway? And he says, oh, we're ELO. And he said, oh, my God, ELO. I had no idea who you were. And he's thinking he's giving them their big break.
I love hearing these stories, but you as the author, you get that rush, right? You capture this when you say, yes, I got something to put in the book that maybe nobody knows.
I call those little nuggets. Yeah, you're really excited when you find those bits. I did a big, long interview with John Kay, who did the El Dorado covers and so forth, and he told me so much that hadn't come out that was unknown about the album cover and all that. And I was so happy to have got that, but it took so long to write the book. He gave an interview to another guy in the meantime and told them the same stuff, and that got published before the book. I was kicking myself.
Well, but in this day and age of the internet, it's hard to find something that people already don't know. But lo and behold, there's always something. There's always something. There's always some story, because there are so many people who are part of these albums. Just like when you see a movie and they roll the credits, all of the people, they all have their stories they can tell.
Yeah,
that we've
and
never
if you
heard
get,
before.
exactly. And if you get these people, I'm saying on the periphery, so they're not like directly involved with the band, but if you get hold of them, they're more than happy to talk about their work and talk what they did. I was never going to be able to talk to Jeff Lynne or anyone involved with that closely with the band about this book. So I just made a conscious decision to find these other people and find out what they could tell me.
But that's it, as great as it would be, of course, to be able to talk to Jeff Lynne or Bev Bevan or Roy Wood. Of course, that would be great. But what I love about podcasting is you listen to a lot of these podcasts, and those are the people that have the opportunity to be on as a guest, and they give you the stories that you never heard before. Part of me would rather hear stories from those guys because we could see all the interviews and hear all the interviews and read them from all the big players. These are the folks that have some really cool stories they can tell about maybe just hanging out with somebody. Say, well, I was hanging out with a singer one night, and boy, you wouldn't believe the night we had. We went to the bar and this, those are the stories that people love.
Absolutely. And I made a promise to myself that everything that goes in the book, I would find out for myself. So even if you find something online, I would try and go back to the original article, the original paper article, or the original audio recording to listen and read what they had to say for themselves. An example of that would be at the end of Don't Bring Me Down, there's a little noise, goes like that at the end. And
yes, what is that?
That's always been described as door closing. And Jeff Lynne said, yeah, that's door closing. And that, when you read about this song, everyone says that's a door closing. Now, I could have just put, yeah, and that sound at the end is a door closing. But to me, that sounds nothing like a door at all. Nothing a bit.
No.
I'm thinking, so what would Jeff Lynne have done? So I get Don't Bring Me Down, I clip that bit, I stick it in Audacity, and I keep slowing it down, until I've slowed it down by 600%, I think. And it's just, it just sounds exactly like a metal car door, actually. But I guess it's a studio door just shutting slowly. And that's kind of what I wanted to do. I didn't want to just repeat stuff that we know and we read. I just wanted to get to the bottom of these things myself.
Yeah, I always thought that was just something, it almost sounded like drumsticks falling on the studio floor. I could never tell what that was, but it's always, as the song is about to end, I'm waiting for it. Waiting for that little, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's cool. 1983's Secret Messages. This is where we get to the direct response to the backmasking controversy that flared up in the early 80s. They fill up this album with intentional messages. How many are there on the album?
Eric, I have no idea. I think I found most of them. I listed them.
There's a lot.
Yeah, I think so. In the book, a description of every song, and whatever messages are in that song, I put in the book. So I won't spoil it for people, but those messages, all the ones I could find, are in there. So we've got a description of the song and then the secret messages. I couldn't find anything malevolent in there at all. Mostly are things like, why are you playing me backwards? I guess the only one I could find that would maybe inspire to someone to go off and do something was a message that said, go plant a tree. So I don't know what that's about, but that's the most malevolent one I could find.
Roger Waters did that with The Wall. There's one of the songs on The Wall where he just says, congratulations, you have discovered the secret hidden message, or something along those lines.
That's right. And The Wall's really good. I like the way The Wall ends halfway through something and starts with the rest of that message. I think it's something like, isn't this where we came in or something?
Yeah, I believe, yeah. The album Secret Messages reaches number 4 in the UK, but it stalls at 36 in the US. Goes gold in both countries, but this is a tough one to talk about. I really can't say I like a song on this album, but maybe I'll give it another listen. But what do you think went wrong with this album, Secret Messages?
Secret Messages was recorded with the intention of being ELO's final album, and so it was recorded as a double album. ELO had 2 albums to deliver, and a double album would have fulfilled their contract. Jeff Lynne was really keen to move away from ELO at this point. I think he just wanted a break from it. And so he just wanted ELO done with. So he thought, well, if I do a double album, I can walk away from ELO now and go off and try different things. So it's recorded with the intention of being a double album. And the sessions weren't that harmonious, unusually for ELO. ELO lost their bass player, Kenny Graucut, during the recording of that album. And Bev Bevan wasn't particularly happy that a drum machine was used on a lot of tracks as well. So it was recorded as a double album. The final song was Hello, My Old Friend, which was kind of a big goodbye song. It's the longest song they've recorded since Kiama on their second album. It was a big musical statement about saying goodbye. It was about Birmingham, where Jeff Lynne grew up, and all this. So they record it as a double, and then the record company say, no, we're not going to release it. We don't want to. They said the economic climate isn't right for a double. Can you cut it down to a single album? So they had to go back to the studio, and Jeff Lynne had to cut it down to a single. Yeah, so I think in the book I said, I don't think he made the best album he could out of that double album.
Was his mind set on producing by this time? Was that where he wanted to go?
Yeah, it was. I think Jeff Lynne loves producing. I think he sees himself as a producer first and foremost. And yeah, it was while recording Secret Messages that he produced a couple of songs for Dave Edmunds, Slipping Away and Information, which were recorded during the recording sessions for Secret Messages. So he wanted to move on, but he also had to cut the album down. I just don't think he made the right choices. It's still a great album. I love it. And it did come out as a double album 3 or 4 years ago on vinyl.
All right, you do like it. It is worth listening. It is worth going back and giving it a listen, because I've heard rock and roll is king.
Yeah.
But I haven't. I've listened to the album once or twice. I should give it another listen again, though.
I think Rock and Roll is King is really atypical of the album. So I think that goes back to Don't Bring Me Down. The record company started releasing these singles that all of a type. Don't Bring Me Down, Hold On Tight, Rock and Roll is King. And I think Rock and Roll is King is a really weak choice for a single and not a particularly great song either. It's quite cheesy, and in the book I do mention other songs on the album which would have been much better as singles.
Yeah.
Something like Danger Ahead perhaps, or Stranger as the first single.
Let me ask you about that Dave Edmunds project, or the projects that he did. Do they have the Jeff Lynne sound that you hear on future albums? There's that Jeff Lynne sound on George Harrison's Cloud 9. You hear it on Tom Petty's Full Moon Fever. You hear it later on Joe Walsh's album that he produced, which I love, which was about 10 years ago maybe. But there's that Jeff Lynne sound. Yeah, so the couple of tracks he produced for Dave Edmunds on the Information album,
Slipping Away Jeff Lynne wrote, Information he didn't write, but he produced. Yeah, you can hear all the little quirks and effects in those. They're pure Jeff Lynne all the way. They're very similar to some of the songs on Secret Messages, but they're both quite loud, fast songs, and you can definitely see that they're Jeff Lynne production.
All right,
maybe not as refined as some of his later ones, because it's Dave Edmunds who's like a rock and roller. Like Dave Edmunds crossed with ELO.
That's another one I got to give a listen.
Yeah, give it a listen to. I think, like I say, the problem with cutting the album down to a single was in all the incarnations, the first side of the album, side one, was never changed, because all the songs kind of flow into each other, and they're all there's 4 quite long songs.
We're talking Secret Messages still, right? You're talking Secret Messages?
Yeah, Secret Messages. They're all quite long songs. All the songs flow into each other, and I think it would be quite hard to unpick those songs from each other. And I don't think they're the best 4 songs to start a single album with. They're great for the double, where you've got more time and space to play around with it. But in the book, I kind of say maybe a different track order would have worked a bit better. But, I'm not going to tell Jeff Lynne what to do.
Yeah.
It's not my business.
Nor will I. The last ELO album we'd hear for another 15 years is Balance of Power from 1986. And it's now just the trio of Jeff Lynne, Bev Bevan, and Richard Tandy, who we haven't mentioned a whole lot about, but Richard Tandy is one of the longtime members of the band. Top 10 in the UK, number 49 in the US. Doesn't even reach gold status. Calling America did well. That single went top 20 in the US, number 18 in the UK, but the magic was gone by this point. What do you think of this album?
It came out 3 years after Secret Messages, so it's a 3-year gap, really long gestation period. Jeff's away producing other artists again in the meantime. The Everly Brothers, for example. The sessions aren't particularly hurried. They're recorded in Nassau and then in Germany. With the benefit of hindsight, I think it's another strong album. I don't think it's a particularly strong ELO album, because if you're, once again, following on that trajectory from El Dorado through to Discovery, it's kind of nothing like those albums at all. And I think that's the issue that maybe many people have with the albums that follow Discovery. They're all so different from each other. The Balance of Power had to be delivered to fulfill ELO's recording contract. I think, maybe at the time we had, is this ELO? It doesn't sound anything like what came before. But once again, 40 years on, we can look at these things differently. We've got what came after now. And we can see that it's just another strong collection of songs. They don't sound like ELO songs. There's no strings on it. There's a saxophone on it. But I think we should cut it a bit more slack now.
Okay.
Balance of power.
You also have
Definitely.
to consider the time it comes out, 1986. The music business is changing. What is considered popular at the time, it's hard. Bands that have been around for a long time to get airplay when there's a shift in programming with radio stations and what MTV is going to play. It's hard to keep up.
Yeah, and unlike Secret Messages, the band did make a real conscious effort to promote this album. They put a touring band together, they played a few shows, and they did a lot of TV appearances as well to promote the songs. But yeah, apart from Calling America, there were no other hit singles from the album.
Well,
it's a shame, really.
We all know what happened to Jeff Lynne after this album. He went on to become one of the top producers of the late 80s, early 90s, and beyond. He produced Tom Petty's Full Moon Fever, George Harrison's Cloud 9, among others. And he's part of the hugely successful Traveling Wilburys project in 1988. They put out 2 albums, but as the years went on, the music of ELO starts to reach new generations of fans, and the magic of those songs and the ELO sound just could not be ignored. Eventually, Jeff brings ELO back. 2001 Zoom. In 2015, we get Alone in the Universe under the tag of Jeff Lynne's ELO. That was due to some legal reasons. That's followed by 2019's From Out of Nowhere. There's certainly Jeff Lynne heavy. Only Richard Tandy is on Zoom and From Out of Nowhere. I don't think any of the former members appear on Alone in the Universe. What do you think of these later era ELO albums?
So Zoom comes out in 2001. Jeff Lynne and Bev Bevan are equal, I'll call it, shareholders of the ELO name. They've both got 50% ownership of the ELO, Electric Light Orchestra name. Jeff buys Bev out, and so he has sole ownership of Electric Light Orchestra and puts out Zoom. And I love Zoom. I think Zoom is worthy of anything ELO did in that original incarnation. I think it's a real effort to make an ELO album for the 21st century, more so than, I think it fits in more so than Balance of Power, for example.
I was surprised the tour that followed, he wasn't able to get that off the ground. There were issues there of ticket sale issues. At least that was the story. I couldn't believe that.
I think so. I think it was kind of times move on, and ELO had been away a long time. And like we've already talked about how ELO's popularity kind of dipped towards the end in the USA. UK, very different, always popular. That popularity never died away. And I think they booked these big stadiums without thinking about how they were going to fill them. They just would put an album out and we'll announce some dates. And you're right, they didn't sell well at all. And I think from that, Jeff thought that ELO just weren't very popular anymore. And it was like another 13, 14 years before he comes back with another album, Alone in the Universe. And that album was triggered by an appearance in the UK on a radio show where the host, Chris Evans, asked him, why you don't tour anymore? We love you, Jeff. And Jeff thinks, no one likes me. I had this tour for Zoom in the USA. No one bought a ticket. So he's in the UK and the host says, well, if our listeners text us now, how many texts would it take for you to do some shows for us? And Jeff says, 2,000? I don't know. And then within 1 minute, they've got 14,000 texts from the UK.
That's awesome.
So Jeff, we want you to play. And by the end of the show, they're tens and tens of thousands of texts.
But it ended up doing good numbers. The ELO tours in the recent past here in the U.S., I think, did great. I think they've been, for whatever reason, I thought the timing was right for Zoom. I guess it just wasn't, but eventually it was.
Absolutely. I think the problem with Zoom, they put some really big arenas. But what goes around comes around. And we've got all those kids that used to listen to ELO now making the big decisions. And suddenly ELO have permission to be popular again.
Yeah,
and they really are. So he records 2 albums under the name Jeff Lynne's ELO. I'm not sure that's a legal thing. I think it's just to differentiate the group from the ELO Part 2 concept, which Bev Bevan had in ELO's.
Which is where I was going to go. Yeah, there was the other version of ELO Part 2, formed by Bev Bevan in the late 80s. They released a few albums, and then in 1999, Bev sold the rights in the ELO name to Jeff Lynne. What do you think of the ELO Part 2 projects?
ELO Part 2 released a couple of albums. The aim was to continue the Out of the Blue era sound of ELO with the big orchestral arrangements. Personally, I don't think they pulled it off. I think there are a couple of songs, 2 or 3 songs, where they've come really close to capturing something, but I just don't, there's only one Jeff Lynne, and that group had a few songwriters, but you just couldn't capture what Jeff Lynne had. But they don't do it for me, but I know those albums have some fans.
In 2017, the band gets into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The members inducted were the principal members, Jeff Lynne, Roy Wood, Bev Bevan, and Richard Tandy, and they're all still with us, which is so great to hear. Jeff Lynne had planned on an ELO tour in 2020, but COVID shut that down. But do we know if he intends on following through on that tour?
Well, we don't know. We do know. We have heard that he sent a message out at the start of the new year saying he's recorded some tracks. So it looks like he's gearing up to put another album out. It's documented that he used to hate touring in the 70s. He's got a really strong band behind him now. He's got this musical director, Mike Stevens, who does all the heavy lifting for him. And, of course, we can now reproduce on stage the sounds of ELO in a much better and authentic way than we could in the 70s and 80s. So Jeff is on record saying he enjoys playing live now. So it'd be really good to see him on tour again later this year, maybe, or next year.
That's great to hear. Great to hear, because ELO, they have their fans here in the U.S. There's no doubt. There are a lot of fans here in the U.S. that would love to see them come back in whatever form they are. Jeff Lynne he's a rarity. He's one of the great songwriters of this era. And it's just great to see that he's still going strong. And also, all the guys are still alive and well. I know there was one member of the band. There was a bizarre death there. Was a hay bale that fell on his car. Who was that? One of the violinists?
As a cellist, we've lost a few members of ELO over the years. We've lost bass player Kelly Bowker, Hugh McDowell, one of the cellists, we lost a couple of years ago. But you're talking about Mike Edwards, who was one of the original cellists in the band, and he was with them up until El Dorado. And unfortunately, he was killed by a hay bale which rolled down a hill just as he was driving past, and it landed on his car.
Where was that? Where was he living at the time?
That was in the UK, in I think it's Somerset or Dorset, that area in the southwest of the UK.
Wow. Yeah, that was bizarre and sad. Electric Light Orchestra. Every album, every song is out now through Sonic Bond Publishing, available wherever books are sold. You can get your copies through the Burning Shed website in the UK. You can get it on Amazon through the US. Any website or social media pages, Barry, want to get out there? Well,
we've got the Sonic Bond website and the Burning Shed website where you can buy the books. I wrote the book very much as a labour of love because I love ELO. They were my first band, so I'm not set up in any way to promote the book professionally. If you like ELO, just get the book, and I really hope you enjoy it because that's all I want from it, people to enjoy and discover the band for themselves.
Well, you have the two most important things there outside of the ability to write, which you clearly have, but there's two important things to a great book and to a great journalist is a passion for the subject and a genuine curiosity to find out more. And that's what you just talked about in this book, how you wanted to know more than what was already out there. You wanted to speak with people that may have not been spoken to or interviewed, and that's what you did. So
I wrote the book kind of to try and do two purposes. For the person curious about the band that only knows the hits, but also you're going to have the fans who are going to want to get the book as well. So I needed to put stuff in for those people to make it interesting for them. And it sounds like I've done what I set out to do, and that's all I wanted.
Absolutely. Well, Barry, thanks so much for being on the podcast, and congratulations on a great book.
Thanks, Eric. Really thank you for allowing me to do this. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks to Barry Delve for taking us through his book, Electric Light Orchestra, every album, every song. If you have a local independent bookstore, make sure you pick up a copy there and support not just Barry, but your local independent bookstore. A link to find your nearest bookstore is on our website, bookedonrock.com. Subscribe to Booked on Rock through Spreaker or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, including Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, TuneIn, YouTube, and more. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/bookedonrockpodcast, on Twitter @bookedonrock. The email address, thebookedonrockpodcast@gmail.com. And if you're a publisher or author of a book and you want to be on the podcast, send me an email or just contact me through our website, bookedonrock.com. I'm Eric Senich. Thanks as always for listening, and join me again next time for another episode of Booked on Rock.